Let's see, decent fish up over here. See if my transducer can stay in the water long enough to see this fish. Should be able to. Looks decent. Come on. Come on. Following, starting to follow. Yep. That was what we like to see. Feels decent too. Might be a good way to start here. Well, welcome back. We have turned the page. We are officially in fall. This can be a super fun time of year, but there can be a lot of changes going on. So today, basically what I'm gonna do is first I'm gonna land this fish because I can't talk and think at the same time. But then we'll talk through some of my favorite kind of go-to fall walleye tips. Oh yeah, solid fish to start. Oh, we'll get this guy off and start talking through some tips. Not crazy long, but thick. We got a 26-incher to start here today. So like I said, we're talking a bunch of fall walleye tips here today. And before we get into too many of the tips, we do want to set the stage a little bit, talk a little bit of the context, talk a little bit about the why, what's going on in the fall. First and foremost, we have temps dropping and we have days getting shorter. And usually what that means, that signifies to these fish that fall is coming, and then on the backside of that, winter is coming. And so typically when fish recognize this, they want to start fattening up for the winter because as it gets colder, their metabolism slows down. So they kind of want to beef up for that colder stretch. But also with the colder weather coming, with the water temps dropping, their metabolism is slowing. So while they want to fatten up with the metabolism starting to slow down, they will often be looking for larger meals. You know, they're not going to have that really high metabolism where they're eating a bunch and eating some small meals, whether it's bugs or small perch or whatever it might be throughout the summer. Now they're trying to capitalize on some high value meals and a little bit larger meals as well. So that's why the switch to those big minnows in the fall can be so key. Also, as the summer progresses into fall here, the forage in general is getting bigger. So those are a couple factors that are leading into some of the context that we're going to talk about with some of these tips this fall. I'm gonna keep fishing and then we'll start ripping through a few of these tips. Right on the edge of this kind of drop off here. See if we'll get one of these to go. Starting to come up for it. Come on, keep coming up. There you bit. Wanted to go straight up for it. Does not seem super giant, but we're back on the board. Yeah, this fall time, it can be a little tricky, especially at the start. But we're gonna talk through, like I said, a few tips. These first few tips are actually gonna talk most specifically about some location information. I'll show this one off quick, and then we'll get on to our first tip. Not a big one, we'll show that one off right there. So like I said, we're talking through a lot of location specific stuff. And tip number one, it's gonna sound very generic, but it is one of the biggest time savers, and that is to just get to know the body of water that you're fishing. Maybe it's a home body of water, maybe it's a new body of water. Talk to the bait shops, talk to locals, do some research online, get to know your body of water, because that will really indicate what's going on at that time of year, and it will help to eliminate a lot of time spent searching around. So for example, like you go to Leech or Winnie, they have this really good shallow sand bite going on in the fall where, you know, a lot of my home lakes, smaller, deep stocked lakes, they might not have that same type of bite. It might be more of a weed oriented bite while they're still there, or it might move to that deep bite on some of that structure. Then you go to maybe like a Canadian Shield style lake, it can be a really good suspended bite. So yes, there's a lot of different bites going on in the fall, but if you just have a little bit of information on the primary bite in your lake or a couple of the primary bites, it can really help to narrow down some water. And the second thing that I'll talk about kind of going along with those patterns is essentially just to reverse the patterns. And what I mean is, especially earlier in September, fish your summer spots, fish with crawlers, fish with leeches, do all the same things you're gonna do in the summer. If that starts to slow down, if that's not working, then I reverse my patterns back towards what I did early summer and then even into the spring, where maybe those fish are suspended in the summer and then they're not there anymore. Now I'll look closer to those break lines, maybe look closer to some of the weeds. As it continues to progress, move up a little shallower, see if they're there. Reverse some of those patterns, and a lot of times that can give you a good indication. Moving on to tip number 3, and that is to follow the weeds. In general, as summer transitions into fall, that's when you start to see some of those weeds dying off. And you know, a lot of times those weeds will stick around even into the winter, especially some of those shallow ones, but those weed lines will get a little bit shallower. And as those weeds kind of lose their green and they start dying off, that's when that bait starts to move from the weeds and can move into some of those shallow areas, can move out deep. And that is where we see some of these fall bites getting good, is when that bait moves out of those weeds into, like I said, either the deep or the shallow. So keep track of the weeds, follow them up as they get shallower. They'll still be around those weed edges if there's any green weeds. And then as that goes away, you might want to keep working shallow with some of that bait. Last tip, as we're talking location type stuff, is to find current. You know, this could be pinch points, this could be islands where there's kind of a natural funnel. This could be an actual river that's flowing in. For whatever reason, a lot of times in the fall, that bait likes to move towards that current, and then those walleyes are often there to follow. So those are our first few tips for location for the fall. And now I'm gonna keep fishing. Then we'll talk through some just different weather things that you can use to your advantage to get on some good bites. Sees it. Geez, that guy came and smoked it. Just kind of working this flat over here, seeing fish roaming here and there. I will say, this is one of those rare fall days that is like, as you can see, I'm in shorts and just a light sun shirt. Not often does that happen, although we're still pretty early into the fall. We're not into the thick of it yet. But this is, I'm gonna take this weather whenever we can, but that is gonna kind of lead into our next tip. This guy's not super big, but I'll net her here and talk through our next tip. Smaller one. So that'll lead us into our next tip, and that is to fish the cold front. Today is beautiful. You don't get many of these days in the fall, but we're taking advantage. But for whatever reason, all the times of the year, cold fronts almost always are a death wish. But as it gets later in the fall, it seems like those cold fronts can get these fish fired up. However, early in September, we had our first cold snap, and I kind of thought that was gonna get the fish going. And I went out and it was tough. It had actually gotten worse. So I think it does need to be late enough into the fall for this to really get going, but I've experienced it so many times where you get into mid, even to late September, and you get some of those cold snaps, and they really get fish fired up. And the next thing that I'm gonna talk about, this isn't necessarily an uncommon thing all year, but another one of those things with the weather that comes into play, especially in the fall, and that is to fish yesterday's wind. Just a short story, I was out with my buddy Grant one day, and we had been catching some fish, and we were on a pretty good suspended pattern, and then it was just blowing all day. Next day we went out, could not really find much suspended, and we went to kind of that area that we were finding suspended fish, and we went to the nearest point that was getting blown into with the wind, and those fish were just stacked up there. And so for whatever reason, whether it was bait, whether it was the water temperature, those fish just really keyed into some of that wind-driven stuff. So a couple weather tips in the fall that I really like to key in on that can get you a few more bites. We'll keep fishing, give you a few fall presentation tips up next. Couple guys hanging out, again, just working this flat. You know, sometimes in the fall, these deep flats can hold a lot of fish, but it can also take a lot of legwork and a lot of just driving around to see certain areas that these fish are hanging out on. Come on. Does he see it? I don't know if he sees it. Maybe that second one will. Maybe that second one will. Oh, that one started seeing it. There we go. That first one finally saw it. These are hanging a little tighter. Typically I see when they're on these flats like this, you know, a lot of times they're in like that 20 to 30 foot flats. Typically I see them up off bottom a little bit, although that's been a little bit of the fish. The mood today is I've not seen a lot of fish suspended. So I don't know if it's weather stuff, which is weird because today's very warm, but that's kind of what we're seeing. Another average fish. We'll take fighters like that all day long. And so a couple presentation stuff that I like to do in the fall. The first one, you've heard me say a bunch. I'm sure you've heard other people say it. And I kind of alluded to it in the intro, and that is to upsize. You see right now I am using a 1/2 ounce meltinator and a 4-inch paddle shad. One of my favorite presentations in the fall. Just mimics those larger minnows as they get to be this size. In the fall, as I said, they're looking for a little bit bigger meal. So having something like this, as you can see, these fish have been a little bit lethargic, but when they want to eat, they crush it. So upsize, whether it's your plastics that you're using, if you're using a reaction style bait, I upsize those as well. If you're using like crankbaits, upsize those, especially minnows. You know, I love using big minnows. So upsizing everything that you're using can be a very key way to get bites in the fall. And so kind of going right along with that is, when in doubt, use a minnow profile bait. Whether the bite is tough, whatever it is in the fall, the later it gets in this fall especially, using those minnow profile baits, whether it could be something like this, like a paddle tail, whether it's rigging a chub, whether it's a crankbait, whatever it is, using those minnow style baits really seem to get bit a lot in the fall. I have less luck with crawlers. However, you can still get bit on crawlers, and leeches had some very good days, especially with leeches in the fall. But transitioning those minnow style baits in the fall is going to be key. I've got a couple more tips for you, but we're going to at least catch one more fish first. Couple out over, you can see a little more pile of rocks. Let's see if we'll get around that guy. Let's see. Hopefully getting in the vicinity here. Oh yeah, there's a couple coming up. These do not appear to be the size structure we're looking for though. We'll see. Definitely doesn't appear to be the size structure we're looking for. Probably a lot of what the same. But we got another one. That one was kind of buried in some of these rocks. You know, these deeper rock piles can so often hold fish in the fall. You know, the leeches and the winnies, like I talked about earlier, those get so, those shallow sand bites get so publicized. But man, there's something about deep rocks in the fall that is so good. Oh, another very average one. Definitely not what we're looking for, but we got another one. We're not gonna end on that one. We got to catch one more decent one before we call it. Moving a little bit. Moving a little bit. Should be able to get around it though. Yep. Should see it. Come up for it, come up for it, come up for it. Come on. There he bit. Took a little bit of a chase, but we got it to go. Still, I don't think a giant, but step in the right direction. There we go. Oh man, I tell you what, there's times where I get excited for the fall, or sorry, for the winter. Like looking at my snowmobile the other day, getting some of my ice fishing stuff ready, but man, I do not, that's a good fish. I do not want to wish away this, that is for sure. Well, this might be a good one to end on. Oh yeah, that is a beauty of a one to end on. A nice, thick 28-incher. That is what I'm talking about. Happy fall. But before we get to the next tip, I suppose I better give a little more in-depth run through on what I'm using today. Today, you know, this is one of my favorite big walleye baits, a 1/2 ounce smeltinator with the 4-inch paddle shad. I love natural colors. I will say, as much as I love these ones, I am very excited for the tungsten ones to come out. simply because of the hook keeper. I think is going to be very good. I'm running that on my typical setup that you've heard me use a lot is a 7.2 medium heavy. That was from Elliott, and I love that for this setup. However, I haven't posted this video yet. I don't know when it's going to come out. We did a camping trip for some lake trout and some walleyes, and I snapped it on a hook set, just bent it over on a walleye. Not sure what happened. So I'm not using that one. So I'm actually been playing around with, this is a 7.6 medium from Trika. I kind of like that actually. It has a little more give. If you know me, you know that I am one that definitely likes to give her the beans, and I'll probably horse these fish in a little more than I definitely should. And so having a little bit longer rod like that and going down to a medium instead of a medium heavy probably isn't a terrible thing for me. However, when I get into, 3/4 and 1 ounce, obviously that's especially when that medium heavy is key. So I used that 7.2 for a long time, really like that. But obviously that one broke. So this has been honestly a pretty suitable replacement. Anytime you can get into that 7 to 7.6 medium or medium heavy, that can be very good depending on the size of the jigs that you're working. That, as always, is the Carbon X2 2000. This is my bread and butter reel. I use it for almost everything, just vary the size. Honestly, I could probably use 3000 size. I keep saying that, but I haven't upgraded yet to the next size up. Probably use it for this, especially if I'm like casting and I want to reel in quickly to recast, spool in a little bit of line more. But that's what I'm using here. I do have links for that and a code that you can use for that in the description as well. This is on 15 pound. This one is not Daiwa J-braid. Usually I use Daiwa J-braid. I can't remember if this is Suffix 832 Advanced maybe, but I like something high vis. Then I'll go to usually a 10 to up to even 20 sometimes fluorocarbon leader, depending on what there is for like pike in the area. But with these fish being a little bit more aggressive on this tactic, sometimes I don't get as worried about having a super light line. I'll connect those with an FG knot, just a very nice castable knot. But that's kind of the setup for that. Last two tips, talking presentation, kind of going right along with that, is to get aggressive. This is what I would consider a somewhat aggressive presentation, especially when you're working it above them. As they start following, you kind of reel up faster. Another one that you've probably heard from a lot of people is using some sort of glide bait, using like a puppet minnow, pitching puppet, something like that. I'll upsize on those as well. Again, every time in the fall, I typically upsize whatever I'm using. So that's going to be a huge thing, is to get those fish to react as they're starting to chomp and chase some of those bigger baits. It can be a super fun bite there. And the last thing is, if I'm not getting bit or I'm not seeing fish kind of suspended like this or up, like I like to fish, that's my style. I love getting these fish to chase. One thing I need to do more myself is fish the bottom, whether that's Lindy rigging over the side and just kind of slow dragging like we used to do all the time, whether that's using one of these and kind of working it closer to bottom. One of my favorites is to transition to Ned rigs this time. If you remember my video from a couple years ago, me and Peter were out, and I was using more of this kind of style, and Peter was using a Ned rig style on some of these same like deep rock stuff, and he was just slowly working it in the area of the fish, not necessarily casting it any individual fish, and he caught 2 or 3 of the biggest fish all day. And something that I don't do enough, because one, I like the live scope footage, and 2, it's fun for me to see him bite. And I feel like I talked about it when I talked about rigging live bait, but if I need to get bit in the fall, the one presentation that I will use is a big minnow on a rig. And what's the nice thing about fall is if they're out deep, they don't seem to be very spooky. So I will often just drive almost right over top of them, so I don't have to cast that thing, or I don't have to troll behind the boat. I'll almost just drop it straight on top of them. And it's so cool to watch. If you ever worked those before trolling, you would know your minnow would start freaking out, and that's when you're gonna get bit. And now we can see it. Now I can see, I'll drop it down. Those fish will see it and they'll start chasing it up, and that minnow will try to swim up and away, and they'll follow it around, and then they'll finally bite you, give it a little bit, and then you set the hook. So if I need to get bit, that is my go-to presentation. But if I can do something like this, that is definitely gonna be my preferred style. So fun little afternoon out here. I've got to get back to school. As you can tell, I'm sick. We've started school, and never fails. First few weeks of the year, I always end up getting sick because kids are full of germs, and I have not been around that. So I need to get back, get some sleep, and get back to school tomorrow. So if you're interested in checking out any more fall videos, I'll put another one right up over here. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.